Hello everyone. So in this tutorial we will learn what is Spring Boot. So if you are someone who has heard about Spring Boot and are not aware of it, this is the right video for you. We'll see what is Spring Boot, some advantages of it, and how to configure it. So what is Spring Boot? Is it a coding technology or is it a Java based IDE? And if not, then what is it? So let's see. Spring Boot is a popular open source framework for creating standalone production ready applications. It is used to create production ready Java based applications that you can just run. So that was the bookish definition. Now let's try and break the terminologies. So what do you mean by standalone applications? Standalone applications means independent web services, REST API services, or microservices. And production ready applications. What do you mean by production ready application? Applications that come integrated with production ready features like actuator, profiles, etc. Spring Boot also has a feature of a default embedded container to run and test our applications, that is Tomcat. Tomcat is an open source container to deploy and test our Java based applications. Okay, so now we have a little brief understanding about what is Spring Boot. So a basic question that I get asked in my trainings, like, is Spring Boot an enhancement of Spring or is Spring Boot related to Spring? So let's try and clear those questions in this segment. So basically, Spring Boot is an extension of the Spring framework. It is, we can say that it is an enhancement of the Spring framework. So using Spring Boot over Spring framework, it eliminates much of the boilerplate and the configuration which we normally use in our Spring based applications. And also we get the features of Spring. Since Spring Boot is built on top of Spring, it comes with all the Spring's features and benefits like the dependency injection. So don't worry, we'll be looking into what is dependency injection in the future videos. For now, let's just have a basic understanding of the differences between Spring and Spring Boot. So if we dive a bit further, we can see that Spring is basically used to develop Java applications, whereas Spring Boot is used to develop Java-based REST services, microservices, web applications in most of the scenarios. The key factor in Spring happens to be dependency injection, whereas it is auto configuration in Spring Boot. Spring is basically based on XML based configurations, and Spring Boot is based on RAD, standing for Application Development, for faster development. Talking about servlets, in Spring we have to manually configure any servlet container if we wish, and in Spring Boot it comes with a default embedded Tomcat container which we can specify to be Jetty also if we wish. In talking about our last point of difference, that is the in-memory database, Spring does not have any in-memory database, whereas Spring Boot, it comes with a pretty good in-memory database in the form of H2 in-memory database, which we will look into our future videos. So that was for the difference between Spring and Spring Boot. So we have talked now about what is Spring Boot, the differences between Spring and Spring Boot. Now let's have a look into the few advantages that come with Spring Boot, which help us in our day-to-day development, that makes the life of a developer easier. So a few advantages of Spring Boot would be Spring Boot, it reduces the development time and hence it helps avoid unnecessary configuration and many other benefits. Like, for example, we can use Spring Boot to create standalone applications, which we have already discussed. We don't need any XML based configurations in Spring Boot. There is an option of an embedded Tomcat container, which is used to run and deploy our Java based applications. Using Spring Boot, we also get production ready features like we get the actuator functionality. If I want to check my health of my application, if I want to check a few metrics of my application, I can do that using actuator. We'll be doing a detailed video on actuator in future. But for now, let's just keep in mind that Spring Boot offers us production ready features. And creating Spring Boot applications, it is quite easy. We can customize the Spring Boot applications using dependency, and we can manage our Spring Boot applications in a not so tedious manner. So these were some of the advantages of Spring Boot, which help us to develop applications quickly and in an efficient manner. So that's what basically Spring Boot is. It basically makes the life of a developer easier. So with this, we come to an end of this tutorial where we learned about Spring Boot. We learned what is Spring Boot. We saw the differences between Spring and Spring Boot. We saw a few advantages that come with Spring Boot. So I know that was a lot of theory, but the next tutorial we will be learning about how to create Spring Boot applications from the scratch. We will be learning some basic annotations of Spring Boot. We'll also learn multiple ways to create Spring Boot applications. We'll have a look into what are dependency descriptors. We'll see the auto configuration feature of Spring Boot, which is, I think, the most magical thing in Spring Boot. Yeah, so okay, that was it for this tutorial. There is a lot of more interesting and exciting stuff coming ahead. So stay tuned, guys, and make sure to subscribe the channel. So this is just the Spring Boot playlist. We will also be learning about AWS cloud computing. We'll learn about Snowflake, what is cloud data warehousing, etc. So I can promise you that there is a lot of educational content coming on this channel, and videos will be uploaded on a daily basis. So make sure to subscribe the channel, make sure to hit the like button. Okay guys, so see you next time in the next video. Take care, thanks.